Standing there, watching my husband embrace a woman I'd never seen before at our daughter's funeral, I felt my entire reality shatter. The secret whispers, the furtive glances. It wasn't grief they were sharing, it was familiarity. But nothing prepared me for the gut punch that followed when I confronted him in the funeral home's private room, surrounded by flower arrangements sent for our beautiful Emma. "You were never enough for me, Melissa, never were, never will be," David said. His voice eerily calm as he straightened his black tie. "Emma was the only reason I stayed." In that moment, as they lowered my 8-year-old daughter's casket into the ground, I discovered my 15-year marriage was built on lies. My husband hadn't just been unfaithful, he had an entire second family, a partner of 12 years and 2 children I never knew existed, 2 healthy children who were very much alive, unlike my Emma. But let me start from the beginning, because what happened next changed everything. Emma was our miracle child, after 3 miscarriages and countless fertility treatments. She was the light that finally broke through our darkness from the moment we brought her home. Wrapped in that yellow blanket her grandmother had wear upon, she became the center of our world, or so I thought. David worked as a pharmaceutical sales rep, a job that kept him on the road 3 weeks out of every month. The constant travel was hard, but we made it work. Video calls with Emma before bedtime. Weekend homecomings that felt like holidays. The distance made our time together more precious. At least that's what I told myself. Daddy travels to help sick people get better, I'd explain to Emma when she'd ask why her father was gone so often. She'd nod, her big blue eyes serious, accepting this explanation with the pure trust only a child could have. Those of you who have lost a child know there's no preparing for it. No parenting book, no therapy session, nothing that can fortify you against that kind of pain. Emma's leukemia diagnosis came when she was 6. The doctors were optimistic at first. Children often respond well to treatment, they said, and for a while it seemed like she would be one of the success stories. David cut back on travel during her first round of treatment, and for those 3 months we were a real family. We'd have movie nights in her hospital room, build blanket forts around her bed, and read her favorite stories until she fell asleep, her little hand clutching mine. Those days, despite the fear and the sterile hospital smell that seemed to permeate everything, hold some of my most treasured memories. But here's something important I didn't realize then. During those 3 months at home, David was constantly on edge. He'd take phone calls in the hospital stairwell, coming back with flimsy excuses about work emergencies. His phone was never out of his sight. At the time, I chalked it up to stress. We were all under immense pressure, watching our daughter fight for her life. "It's just work," he'd say, kissing my forehead. "Someone has to keep the insurance that's paying for all this." The guilt would silence any doubts I had. How could I question him when he was right? His job was keeping us afloat financially during the most difficult time of our lives. When Emma went into remission the first time, it felt like we could breathe again. David resumed his travel schedule, and life returned to a kind of normal. But 8 months later, the cancer came back more aggressively. This time, the prognosis wasn't good. The night we received the news that the second round of treatment wasn't working, I found David in our bathroom, sobbing on the floor. It was the only time I'd ever seen him truly break down. I sat next to him, wrapped my arms around his shoulders, and we cried together. In that moment, I felt closer to him than I had in years. "I can't lose her. Mel," he whispered, "I don't know how to live in a world without Emma." What I didn't know then was that he wasn't just grieving for Emma, he was grieving for the house of cards he'd built, knowing it was about to collapse. The last few weeks of Emma's life were a blur of hospital rooms, beeping machines, and hushed conversations with doctors in hallways. David was there, physically present more than he had been in years, but emotionally, he seemed to be somewhere else. I was too consumed with Emma's care to really notice. 3 days before she died, Emma had a moment of startling clarity. The pain medications had been making her drowsy and confused, but that afternoon, she was fully present, her eyes bright and alert. "Mommy," she said, her voice raspy from the breathing tube they'd removed the day before. "I think I'm going to see the angels soon." I tried to reassure her, to tell her she was getting better, but she shook her head with a wisdom no 8-year-old should possess. "It's okay, I'm not scared," she continued, "but I'm worried about you and Daddy. Who's going to take care of you when I'm gone?" I remember stroking her hair, which had grown back and soft. "Downy tufts after her last treatment. We'll take care of each other." "Sweetheart, that's what mommies and daddies do." She frowned slightly, looking over at David, who was standing by the window, his back to us. "But Daddy has his other." Before she could finish, she was seized by a coughing fit so severe that the nurses rushed in. By the time they stabilized her, she was too exhausted to continue our conversation. I forgot about her unfinished sentence in the chaos that followed. Emma slipped away on a Tuesday morning. One moment she was there, her little chest rising and falling, and the next she was gone. The room felt immediately different, as if all the light had been sucked out of it. David stood on one side of her bed, me on the other, both of us holding her cooling hands. The days that followed were a haze. I functioned on autopilot, making arrangements, accepting condolences, picking out a dress for my daughter to be buried in. David handled the guest list for the funeral, insisting on managing that part himself. "It's the one thing I can do for her, Mel," he said. "Let me handle this." And I did. I was too numb, too broken to argue. The morning of the funeral was unseasonably warm for October. I remember thinking how Emma would have loved the sunshine, how she would have wanted to go to the park and collect the red and gold leaves that had fallen overnight. Instead, I was putting on a black dress I'd never wear again and preparing to say goodbye to my only child. The funeral home chapel was filled with flowers, lilies, and white roses, Emma's favorites. People I hadn't seen in years came to pay their respects. My parents, frail and devastated at outliving their granddaughter. My sister, who flew in from Seattle, David's colleagues, some of whom I'd never met despite his years with the company, and then there were the strangers. A small group who sat at the back. A woman about my age with 2 children, a boy around 10 and a girl who looked to be 12 or 13. I assumed they were from the hospital. Perhaps other parents of children Emma had befriended during her treatments during the service. I was too consumed by grief to notice much. It wasn't until the reception afterward, in the funeral home's gathering room, that I saw something that stopped me cold. David was in a corner, speaking intently with the woman I'd noticed earlier. There was an intimacy to their body language that seemed out of place. Her hand rested on his arm, in a gesture that spoke of years of familiarity. The 2 children stood beside her, somber in dark clothing. The girl was crying quietly, and David reached out to wipe away her tears with the handkerchief I had ironed for him that morning. It was the same tender gesture he used to make for Emma. Something clicked into place. Emma's unfinished sentence, David's secretive phone calls, the frequent travel. The way he'd been pulling away emotionally for years. I watched, frozen, as the boy tugged on David's suit jacket and whispered something. David knelt down to the child's level, the way he used to do with Emma, and nodded solemnly. The resemblance between them hit me like a physical blow. The same cleft chin. The same sandy brown hair that never quite lay flat. Before I could process what I was seeing, my sister appeared at my side. "Melissa? Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't speak. Could only point discreetly toward the corner where my husband, the father of my dead child, was comforting a family I knew nothing about. "Who are they?" my sister asked, following my gaze. "I don't know," I managed to whisper. "But I think they're David's." My sister's sharp intake of breath confirmed I wasn't imagining things, wasn't creating drama out of grief. She saw it to the unmistakable connection between David and these strangers. "I'm going to get you out of here," she said firmly, taking my elbow. "You don't need this today." Not today of all days, but I pulled away from her. A strange calm had settled over me, replacing the initial shock. "No. I need to know. I need to know right now." I walked across the room, my legs somehow carrying me forward when all I wanted was to collapse. Conversations hushed as I passed. I felt rather than saw people turning to watch, sensing the tension, the impending collision of worlds that were never meant to meet. David saw me coming. His face drained of color. He straightened up from his conversation with the boy and stepped forward, as if to intercept me before I could reach the woman and children. "Melissa," he said, his voice low and warning. "This isn't the time or place." "Then when is David?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "After we bury our daughter tomorrow?" "Next week. When would be a convenient time for you to explain who these people are?" The woman had gone very still, her hand protectively on each child's shoulder, up close. I could see she was beautiful in an understated way. No makeup at the funeral, modest clothes. A simple gold band on her left hand, a wedding ring. She was wearing a wedding ring. "Jennifer," David said, his voice resigned. "This is Melissa, Melissa. This is Jennifer, and these are my children, Ethan and Lily, my children. Not our children, my children, Mom." The girl Lily asked, looking confused and frightened. "What's happening, Mom?" She called the woman Mom, which meant, "You're married," I said, the words falling into the silence like stones. "You have to families." Jennifer looked as shocked as I felt. Her eyes, white and blue just like the boys, just like Ethan's, darted between David and me. "David," she questioned. "What is she talking about? You said you were divorced. You said Emma was from your first marriage." "First marriage," he'd told her. The first was his ex-wife. That Emma, our precious Emma who had just died, was from a relationship that had ended. The room had gone completely silent. Even the funeral director had stopped pretending to arrange flowers and was watching the scene unfold with poorly disguised fascination. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere private," David suggested, looking around at the audience we'd attracted. "No," I said firmly. "I just buried my daughter. I'm not going anywhere." I turned to Jennifer, who looked as devastated as I felt. "How long?" I asked her. She swallowed hard. 12 years. We've been married for 12 years. 12 years. Nearly as long as my own marriage. Which meant he'd been living this double life almost from the beginning. "She's lying," David said quickly. "Melissa, you're not thinking clearly. You're grief-stricken. Let me take you home and I'll explain everything." But Jennifer was already opening her purse with shaking hands. She pulled out her phone, tapped the screen a few times, and then held it out to me. "Here's our wedding photo. May 15th, 12 years ago. At the Westbrook Hotel in Cincinnati." I didn't need to look at the photo. I remembered that weekend, David had gone to a medical conference in Cincinnati. He'd brought me back a snow globe from the hotel gift shop. "We live in Cincinnati," Jennifer continued, her voice trembling. "David comes home every weekend. He's not with you and Emma." She looked down at her children, who were watching the adults with confused, frightened expressions. "He told me he traveled for work during the week." The symmetry of the lies was almost elegant to each of us. He was the traveling husband, the devoted father who came home bearing gifts and stories from the road. Neither of us questioning the perfectly crafted narrative he'd created. "You told me she was dead," Jennifer whispered to David, tears filling her eyes. "When Emma was diagnosed, you told me her mother had died of cancer years ago, that she had no one but you." That revelation cut deeper than anything else. While I was sitting by our daughter's hospital bed, holding her hand through chemo treatments, David was telling his other wife that I was dead, erasing me from existence while I fought to keep our child alive. I looked at David, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. This man I'd shared a bed with, raised a child with, grieved with. I didn't know him at all. "Is anything you've ever told me true?" I asked. He didn't answer, just looked between Jennifer and me with the cornered expression of a man watching his carefully constructed world implode. What happened next is something I still think about. The funeral home director, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and compassionate eyes, stepped forward and gently took my arm. "Mrs. Calloway," she said quietly, using a name that I suddenly wasn't sure was legally mine. "We have a private room where you can continue this conversation away from prying eyes." She glanced meaningfully at the other funeral attendees, who were making a poor show of not listening. I allowed her to lead me toward a door marked private, aware of David, Jennifer, and the two children following behind like a bizarre procession. My sister started to come with us. But I shook my head slightly. This was something I needed to face alone. The room was small but tastefully decorated, with muted green walls and comfortable seating. A box of tissues sat on a side table, a fixture in a place where difficult conversations were commonplace. The funeral director closed the door behind us with a soft click. "Take all the time you need," she said before leaving us alone. For a long moment, no one spoke. The children huddled close to their mother, sensing the tension but not understanding its source. David stood between us, his gaze fixed on the carpet. "Sit down," I said to Jennifer, gesturing to the couch. "Please," she hesitated, then nodded and sat. Pulling the children down beside her, David remained standing, like a defendant awaiting sentencing. "I think," I said carefully, "that we've both been lied to for a very long time." Jennifer nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I never knew. I swear I never knew about you. About Emma being sick. He told us she had recovered, that she was in remission." "She was," I said, a fresh wave of grief washing over me. "For 8 months. Then it came back." "Mom," the boy Ethan tugged at Jennifer's sleeve, "is Emma really dead? Dad said we were coming to say goodbye, but he didn't say she died." My heart broke for these children. Unwitting participants in their father's web of deception. They'd known about Emma while she'd never known about them. They'd been kept updated on her illness while being shielded from the gravity of it. "Yes, sweetie," Jennifer answered, her voice cracking. "Emma passed away. That's why we're here today." The girl, Lily, looked at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Were you really Emma's mom?" I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "Dad showed us pictures of her. She was pretty," Lily continued. "He said she was our sister, but we couldn't meet her because she was special and needed extra care." Special and needed extra care. That was how he'd explained away keeping his family separate, using Emma's illness as an excuse for his lies. I turned to David, who hadn't spoken a word since we entered the room. "How could you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How could you use our daughter's sickness to hide your other life?" He finally looked up, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't remorse, it was relief. The relief of a man no longer carrying the weight of deception. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way," he said. "None of this was planned. 15 years of marriage wasn't planned," I asked, incredulously. 12 years with Jennifer wasn't planned. These children weren't planned. What exactly about this decades-long deception was an accident? "David," he ran a hand through his hair. A gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. Despite everything, I met Jennifer on a business trip. It was supposed to be a what-I'm thing. But then what? Jennifer demanded, finding her voice. "You decided to marry me while still married to Melissa? You decided to have children with me while raising Emma with her? You decided to lie to all of us for over a decade?" "I couldn't choose," he said simply, as if that explained everything. "I couldn't give either of you up." "So you chose both," I said flatly. "You chose to have it all, regardless of the cost to us." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something shift in his expression. The mask he'd worn for so long slipped completely away. "You were never enough for me, Melissa," he said, his voice eerily calm as he straightened his black tie. "Never were. Never will be. Emma was the only reason I stayed." The cruelty of his words in that moment, the day we buried our daughter, stole my breath. I heard Jennifer gasp beside me, her shock matching my own. "And what about us?" she asked, her voice small. "Were we not enough either? Is that why you kept Melissa and Emma?" David looked between us, these two families he'd created and maintained in parallel universes, and for the first time, I saw him for what he truly was, not a loving father torn between two worlds, but a selfish man who took what he wanted without regard for the damage he caused. "I loved parts of both lives," he said. "With Melissa, I had status, connections, a life in the city that advanced my career. With you, Jennifer, I had warmth, a real home, children who were healthy and normal." The word hung in the air between us. Had he resented Emma for her illness? Had he seen her as damaged somehow? Less valuable than his normal children with Jennifer? Get out, I said, my voice deadly quiet. Get out of this room, get out of this funeral home, get out of my sight. Melissa, no, you don't get to speak anymore. Not today. Not at our daughter's funeral. Jennifer stood, pulling her children up with her. We're leaving too, she said firmly. Children, say goodbye to your father. The children looked confused, Ethan clinging to his mother's hand while Lily stared at her father with hurt and betrayal written across her young face. Dad, Lily asked, her voice small. Are you coming home with us? David looked at his daughter, his other daughter, the one who was still alive, and hesitated. I don't think that's a good idea right now, sweetheart. You're not welcome in either home, Jennifer said, her voice suddenly strong and clear. Not after this. Not after what you've done to all of us. As they moved toward the door, I found myself speaking to Jennifer. Wait, she turned, wariness in her eyes. It's not your fault, I said, or the children's. None of this is on you. Something passed between us, then a moment of understanding, of shared betrayal and shared strength. She nodded once, then guided her children from the room, closing the door behind them. David and I were left alone in the silence. I want a divorce, I said simply. I want you out of the house by the time I get home from burying our daughter. I never want to see your face again. Melissa, be reasonable. We need to talk about this, about the house, about finances. We will. Through lawyers. For now, all you need to know is that if you're not gone by tonight, I'm calling the police and reporting you for bigamy. It's still a crime, in case you've forgotten. He paled at that. David had always been careful about his public image, his professional reputation. A criminal charge would destroy everything he'd built. You wouldn't? Try me, I said, finding strength I didn't know I possessed. After what you've put me through, put us all through, do you really want to test what I'm capable of? He studied my face, perhaps seeing for the first time that the woman he'd married, the woman he'd dismissed as never enough, had steel in her spine. I'll go, he said finally, but this isn't over. It is for me, I replied, standing to leave. I have a daughter to bury, and after that, I have a life to rebuild, one that doesn't include you. I walked out of that room with my head held high. Rejoining the funeral service for my beloved Emma, David didn't return to the chapel. From the window, I saw him walking to his car alone, a man who had lost everything in his attempt to have it all. But that's not where this story ends. You might think it would be satisfying enough to watch David lose both his families in one fell swoop, to know that his web of lies had finally collapsed around him. And for a while that was enough. I was too consumed by grief for Emma, too shattered by betrayal, to think beyond my immediate pain. The days after the funeral passed in a blur. David cleared his things from our house while I was meeting with Emma's school principal about creating a memorial scholarship in her name. When I returned home, it was as if he'd never lived there, every trace of him gone except for the photos of him with Emma that I couldn't bear to take down. A week later, as I was sorting through Emma's things, deciding what to keep and what to donate, my doorbell rang. Standing on my porch, looking nervous but determined, was Jennifer. I hope it's okay that I came, she said. I found your address in David's things when he came to collect them from our house. I invited her in, this woman who, under different circumstances, I might have befriended. We sat in my kitchen. Two betrayed wives sharing coffee and piecing together the shattered fragments of our lives. I filed for divorce yesterday, she told me. My lawyer says because our marriage wasn't legal since he was already married to you, I'll have to pursue different legal remedies. I nodded. I've filed too. My lawyer says I have a strong case for fraud on top of the bigamy charges. We compared notes, filling in the gaps of our parallel lives. How David had maintained his deception for so long, using his job in pharmaceutical sales as the perfect cover for his double life. How he'd kept to separate phones, to separate bank accounts, even to separate styles of clothing, more formal with me, casual and relaxed with Jennifer. He was like to different people, Jennifer marveled. With you, he was ambitious, David, climbing the corporate ladder. With us, he was relaxed, family man, David. Neither version was real, I said. The real David is the one who could lie to both of us for years, who could use his dying daughter as an excuse to maintain his deception. Jennifer reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm so sorry about Emma, truly. The kids have been asking about her, about the sister they never really got to meet. That's when an idea began to form, a way to reclaim some small piece of justice from this tragedy. Would you like to see her room? I offered. I haven't changed anything yet. And maybe your children might want some of her things. Books she loved, toys that meant something to her? Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. Are you sure? That's such a generous offer. Emma would have loved having a brother and sister, I said, my voice breaking. She always wanted siblings. In a different world, in a better world, they would have known each other. We spent the afternoon in Emma's room, sharing stories about her love of butterflies, her talent for drawing, her infectious laugh. I sent Jennifer home with a box of Emma's favorite books for Ethan and Lily. A tangible connection to the sister they'd never know before she left. Jennifer hesitated at the door. There's something else I came to tell you. Something I discovered after David left. She pulled an envelope from her purse and handed it to me. I found this when I was going through our financial records. It's a life insurance policy David took out on Emma 3 years ago. He made himself the sole beneficiary. The payout is $2 million. My hands shook as I examined the document. The policy had been taken out shortly after Emma's first diagnosis, when the doctors were still optimistic about her chances. The timing couldn't have been coincidental. He was betting on her death. I whispered, horror washing over me. He was planning to use our daughter's death for a payout, Jennifer. Nodded grimly. There's more. I found records of him researching countries without extradition treaties, recent searches, from just before Emma passed away. The picture suddenly became clear. David hadn't just been maintaining two separate lives, he'd been planning his exit strategy. Emma's death was going to fund his disappearance. His fresh start somewhere beyond the reach of American law. He's going to run, I said. As soon as the insurance pays out. Not if we stop him first, Jennifer replied, a determined glint in her eye. What followed was a crash course in investigative work. As Jennifer and I pooled our knowledge and resources to track David's movements and plans, we hired a private investigator with money scraped together from our suddenly precarious finances. We alerted the insurance company to the potential fraud. We contacted the police about the bigamy, providing all the evidence we'd gathered 3 weeks after Emma's funeral. As I was sorting through the mail, I received a letter from the life insurance company. The claim had been processed not to David, but to me. In the confusion of Emma's final days, he'd neglected to change the beneficiary designation from our original policy. The $2 million that was supposed to fund his escape was now in my control. That same day, Jennifer called with news from the private investigator. David had purchased a one-way ticket to Bali, departing in 2 days. A country with no extradition treaty with the United States, just as we'd suspected. He doesn't know about the insurance money, I told her. He thinks it's being processed to his account. So he's planning to leave before he realizes the money isn't coming, Jennifer concluded. What do we do? What we did next wasn't something I'm particularly proud of, but it was necessary. We set a trap. I called David, my voice carefully modulated to sound defeated and resigned. The insurance money came through. I told him, I think we should meet to discuss it, after all. You were Emma's father too. He was cautious but intrigued. What did you have in mind? Dinner. Tomorrow night, that Italian place Emma loved, he agreed, just as I knew he would. The prospect of getting his hands on the money he needed for his escape plan was too tempting to resist. The next evening, I arrived at the restaurant early. Selecting a table with a clear view of the entrance, Jennifer was positioned at the bar. Unrecognizable in a dark wig and glasses, a precaution in case David spotted her and became suspicious. David arrived 10 minutes late, looking nervous but trying to hide it behind a facade of confidence. He'd lost weight since the funeral, and there was a hunted look in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Melissa, he said, taking the seat across from me. You're looking well, am I? I asked coolly. I wouldn't know. I haven't really looked in a mirror since we buried our daughter. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. I'm sorry about everything that happened. It wasn't supposed to end like this. How was it supposed to end, David? With you disappearing with Emma's insurance money, starting a new life in Bali. Perhaps his face went slack with shock. How did you know about your travel plans? Or about the insurance policy you took out, betting on our daughter's death? Before he could respond, two police officers approached our table. One placed a hand on David's shoulder. David Calloway, the officer said, we'd like to speak with you about some very serious allegations. I stood, gathering my purse. They have questions about bigamy, insurance fraud, and wire fraud, among other things. I've already given them my statement. David's face contorted with rage. You set me up. No, David. You set yourself up. You built a house of cards. And now it's falling down around you. As the officers led him away, Jennifer approached the table, removing her wig. David's eyes widened in shock at seeing his two wives together, united against him. The children send their regards, Jennifer said coldly. They wanted me to tell you they understand now why you were never there for their school events. You were too busy being a father to another family. We watched in silence as David was escorted from the restaurant, the other diners pretending not to stare at the unfolding drama. It's really over, Jennifer said quietly when he was gone. Not quite, I replied. We still have the legal battles ahead. But he won't be fleeing the country at least. What will you do now? She asked as we walked to the parking lot. With the insurance money, I mean. I'd given this a lot of thought in the days since discovering the policy payout. Half of it goes to Emma's Memorial Foundation. The other half, I'd like to set up trust funds for Ethan and Lily. For college, for their futures. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. Melissa, you don't have to do that. I want to, I said firmly. Emma would have wanted it. They're her siblings, after all. We embraced in the parking lot, these unlikely allies brought together by betrayal and bound now by something stronger, a commitment to healing, to justice, to honoring the memory of a little girl who deserved so much better. David was sentenced to 8 years for fraud and bigamy. Neither Jennifer nor I attended his sentencing hearing. We were too busy building new lives from the wreckage he'd left behind. I moved to Cincinnati, just a few miles from Jennifer and the children. We're not conventional family by any means. But we've created something meaningful from our shared trauma. Ethan and Lily call me Aunt Mel. They visit Emma's grave with me on her birthday, leaving drawings and small tokens. They ask questions about their sister and I tell them stories that keep her memory alive. Some days the grief still overwhelms me. I miss Emma with an ache that never truly subsides. But there's comfort in knowing that her short life created ripples that continue to spread. The Memorial Foundation that funds pediatric cancer research. The relationships that formed in the aftermath of betrayal. The justice that was served at Emma's grave on the anniversary of her passing. Jennifer and the children standing beside me, I realized something profound. David was wrong when he said I was never enough. I was enough to uncover his lies. Enough to seek justice. Enough to forge a new kind of family from the ashes of his deception. And Emma, my beautiful, brave Emma, she was always more than enough. In her 8 short years, she taught me more about love, resilience, and courage than David ever could in a lifetime of lies. This isn't the life I imagined for myself. It's not the one I would have chosen, but it's the one I've built, stone by stone, from the rubble of betrayal and loss, and in its own way, it's enough.